In this video, we're going to be covering a tutorial on the Wire EDM in version 31. To get started, we're going to go up to the CAM tab, and we're going to say New Job, and then we're going to choose Wire EDM. Now, it's going to choose this Sodic Mark 21, but you'll be able to choose whichever machine you want. And then I'm going to go ahead and go right into the Stock Wizard. Now, when we click Stock Wizard, it's first going to ask us to pick the workpiece. We're not actually going to pick a workpiece because we don't have a solid model on the screen for this part. So we'll go ahead and just hit Next right past that. And we'll just go ahead and create a rectangular piece of stock. And we'll just change the size of it. Right now it's 9.5 by 5.5 by 1. I'm going to go ahead and make it 10 by 6 by 1 inch thick. And then if I scroll down to the bottom, I can hit the next arrow. And then I can pick my origin. And I'm going to leave it right where it's at, right dead center there. And then I can go ahead and hit OK. So now what I have showing on the screen here is my entire part. And what I want to cut out is all these inside pockets and then do an outside profile. These points that we have inside all of these pockets represent the fact that there's a hole already drilled in the part. And that's where we're going to thread the wire through. So now I can right click on Machine Setup 1. And I'm going to start with a 2-axis inside. So I'm going to pick that and then just say Select Geometry. And I'm just going to go back to a top view by clicking this button here. And then I just go in and pick every piece of geometry. So I'm going to pick those two, these two, these two, these two over here. And then for the inside one, I'm going to make sure to hold Shift and then click on it. And then I can right click and hit OK. Now that's all the geometry that I want to do the inside cuts for. Now we get to determine how we're going to cut that. So we have our stock thickness, we have our upper and lower guide location if your machine needs that output. Right here we have our glue stop options. So we can use glue stop with leads, or we can use glue stops without leads, or we could just say no glue stop. I'm going to just say use a glue stop with leads, and let's have the stop distance, so the break or the gap that is going to stay uncut, we'll leave it at 1/8 of an inch. And then right here we have our options for adding a taper. I'm going to go with none, but we also have the ability to do a taper in either direction or a land and taper. With none, I'm just going to have a vertical wall, so I'll go ahead and hit Next. Right here we then get our strategy. So there's 3 different strategies by default. And with strategy number 1, it gives us a rough cut, a tab cut, and a skim cut. If we do just strategy 2, it's just going to be a rough cut, and strategy 3 is going to be just a rough and a tab cut with no skim cuts. So I'll go with strategy 1 and then hit Next. Right here is the wire definition, which is all set up through the CAM tree and through these top buttons up here. So we have our wire diameter set to 10 thousandths. I'm not going to enable any starting cutting conditions, and I'm not changing any rapid feed rate. So I'll go ahead and just hit Next. Right here we have our arc spline tolerance set to 1/2 thou. Our work offset is set to number 1. But if you wanted 2 or 3, just depending on which work offset you're using, you just change it during your feature. And then our posting order is going to be by shape. Now, if we go by shape, it means it's going to rough, tab, and skim a shape before moving on to another shape. If we say go by operation, we're going to rough out a section, move to the next section and rough it, and work to each one. We're going to go by each individual operation instead of each individual shape. We're going to keep it as individual shapes, so we'll go ahead and hit Next. Right here we have the machine sequence. This would be the ordering that we want to go in. So I want to tell it to go in the closest order. So it should go from just one pocket to the next closest pocket. Shouldn't jump around too much. Sometimes it will when you use something like no sorting, or even longer moves if we use X or Y direction, which will force it to output along the X or along the Y. And I'll tell it to start at the upper right-hand corner and just to zig its way around. Next, we then have our parameters for the 2-axis rough cut. Now with the rough cut we have a profile or a coreless cut. Now the reason I don't have a coreless cut is because I have a tab cut going on, is because the glue stop is telling it not to do a coreless cut. So I have my coreless option blanked out. We're going to go with a standard profile. I have system compensation turned off, and I have machine compensation turned on. So BobCAD's going to put the G41 or G42 that's needed to keep this cutting on the inside of the part for our 2-axis inside. Next, we have our corner types. We can go sharp, we can go round, we can make loop radiuses, loop lengths. I'm just going to keep them with sharp and then say Next. Then we have our leads. Now right here, the first thing we see is a start hole. Now if we had a hole drilled in the part and we wanted to use something like a coreless cut, well, you tell us what the diameter is, and we know then what size hole that we don't have to cut. So if there's a 1-inch hole in your part, that's already drilled in, you're going to thread the wire through there and then do a coreless cut, we then know we don't have to cut for the first 1 inch of that hole. We can move away from the center and then hit the wall and start cutting. So you just have to define the diameter and we will take care of it from there. Right here, if you have an auto threader, this just threads vertically. And then you have your lead in and lead out options. So we have our lead ins and lead outs, but it's also a place where I can pick my start point. So I want to go in and say select point. And then I just want to come in and say pick points. Now I'm just going to go in and pick all the points from the inside of these shapes here. There's one in the middle here. I just got to select. There it is, object 5. And then we'll grab all the rest of these points. Now by setting all these start points up like this, just selecting them, and then you right click and hit OK, now BobCAD's going to use each one of those start points for each one of those pockets. If it doesn't, we may have to choose the option that says perpendicular to closest to make sure that it goes to the closest piece of geometry to it. Next, we then have our cutting conditions. Now, I usually wait till the last page to even look at cutting conditions because I still haven't set up how many skim passes I'm going to do. So I'm going to ignore it for now. We'll go ahead and just hit next. Right here under parameters for the tab cut, we have a standard profile, which is just going to cut the tab. We also have the option to flip the pass direction, which if we are going, say, clockwise, this would flip it so that it goes counterclockwise for this cut. We're also going to use machine compensation, then say next. The leads for this, we're going to leave on perpendicular with a length of 100 thousandths, and that should just come in, cut the tab, and then leave the part again. And we're not going to change the diameter, so we'll go ahead and hit next. Right here's our cutting conditions, and again, we're just going to ignore them until we get to the last page of cutting conditions. Right here, we have our skim pass. Now, we still have a standard profile, and we still have the flip pass direction option, but now is where we define how many skims we have. Now, we can either do skims in the same direction and then tell BobCAD how many skim passes we want, or we can reverse the skims. So we'll get one, say, clockwise, and then one counterclockwise, and then one clockwise again. I'm going to go skims in the same direction and just say 2, and then I'm going to leave the machine compensation set to on, and then hit next. Corner types, I'm not going to make any changes here. Same with the leads. I'm just going to go up to the leads, go down to the select point, and I'm going to just go pick my points again. So I'm just going to pick all these points around here one more time. There we go. Got it in the middle. That one, that one, that one, and that one. And then just hit OK. And then I'll go ahead and hit next. Then we have our cutting conditions. Now I wait till this page because up until this point, we would have only had one skim pass any other time we looked at the cutting conditions. Now this machine has a database, so it's automatically pulling in the cutting conditions. But if you didn't have the cutting conditions set up inside of BobCAD, you can go right here where it says Edit Table, and you can actually type in the power setting, the offset, the feed rate, the speed, the tension, and you can also leave comments on it. And you just have to double click on the box, and it'll let you start editing. When you're all done, you can't hit next anymore. We're going to go ahead and just hit compute. And there is all the toolpath. If I rotate this around and I right click, here's my rough pass. I'll go ahead and change the color of this to green and then hit OK. And then the tab cut, I'll just go ahead and change the color of this to an orange. And then for the skim passes, we'll just change these to pink. So I'll hit OK. So we won't see too much of a difference, but if I blank all this toolpath out, we could see here's the rough cut. Here's the tab cut, and then here's the skim cut. What I really need to do is go into this feature and make sure that the tab cut uses the same leads as the other one. So I'm just going to go to the leads page for the 2-axis rough cut and then say apply to all operations. And what that's going to do is it's going to copy all those settings to all the other leads pages. So now I can go ahead and hit compute, and now everything is going to go back to that center start point. The next thing we're going to do is just shrink up the 2-axis inside, right click on machine setup 1, and then let's do a 2-axis outside. So now I just say select geometry. I'm just going to hold shift and pick the outside shape, and then right click and hit OK. Now for this one, I'm just going to do a rough cut. I'm not going to do any skim passes. I'm not going to do any glue stops. So I'm going to say no glue stop, no taper, and go next. Right here we then have our strategy. If I choose strategy 2, it just gives me a rough cut. So I'll go next. Right here's our wire parameters. So we got the wire diameter and then enable start cutting conditions as well as rapid feed rates. Our posting page, we have our arc spline output again, the work offset, and then our posting order. And I'm going to go with individual shape and then go next. Right here we have our machine sequencing. We're only cutting one profile on this, so we don't really have to worry about that. Parameters, we're just doing a standard profile. Our compensation set to machine comp on. If you do want to use BobCAD compensation where we compensate for the wire, you just turn our compensation on. That will not give you a G41 inside your G code though. Next we have our corner types, no changes here. Next we have our leads. Again, no changes here. I'm going to change the lead in. We'll do a circular lead in and then just hit next. Right here we'll just do our cutting conditions. So this would be the point that if I was all right with these settings, I'd leave them. Otherwise, I can click Edit Table and modify my settings. When I'm all done, I'll go ahead and hit Compute. And then I'll just right-click on my 2-axis rough cut and change the color of it to green, and then hit OK. And we will see there is the green path all the way around. And then that's the whole part. So if I unblank the other one, we'll see we have cuts on every single feature. And if we run the simulation, you'll see this whole thing get cut out. And then to actually get the G code, we want to go up to where it says Wire EDM job, right click, and then just say post. And the post is all set up with the machine. So I'm using the Sodic Mark 21 post. And so it's creating code specifically for the Sodic Mark 21. If you have a different post, you just right click on this, say edit, and then pick your post right through the select folder. So you'll pick whichever post you want to use for your EDM. And there's your G code. And that concludes the tutorial on the Wire EDM from BobCAD version 31.